Hey, welcome to Watercolor by Scarlett. It is 3:30 in the morning. I just woke up and thought that I would take some time to do the voiceover on this little tutorial so you guys can see what's going on. Because the house is quiet. There's no goats hopping around and other rescued animals. No birds making noise outside. So this is a monochromatic painting. I'm using Quinacridone Gold, and this particular Quinacridone Gold comes from Winsor & Newton. It's on a Winsor & Newton pan. I think it's a full pan, or I have another word for that. It's a little porcelain dish that where the paint comes in the porcelain dish already, and it's awesome. It's a huge pile of paint. And they're pretty expensive, but I do think they're worth it if you love to paint one color and you like to just sprawl out your paints. Like, it's a little bit of a luxurious product, but it's a lot of fun to use. So I have a whole stack of them, and I'm thrilled to have them. You can also buy Quinacridone Gold in tiny amounts and from different companies. Schminke, Daniel Smith, for example. Winsor & Newton has smaller amounts too. So you're definitely not stuck having to get this large one if you wanted to get this particular color. Now, this is a tonal value sketch, originally a sketch. Actually, it's part of a post that I did for Patreon a few days ago. And now I'm doing the painting, which is, this whole thing is a big assignment. So the concept is, or the assignment is, take a photo and sketch the photo using tone. So capturing the lights and the darks. And then obviously monochromatic in graphite. Then, after you've done that, pick one color that you think will suit the scene, the feeling. In this case, I went with Quinacridone Gold because it has a large range in color. It goes from very, very dark to very, very, very light. It's also beautiful, really rich red, really good for fall. So pick one color that you feel would work for your photo or your piece or whatever it is you're painting, your subject. And then using the sketch that you've already done, and of course in the sketch we've really mapped out, you've gone into great detail, so I recommend checking out the post on Patreon if you're not sure what tonal value is or why it's important or how to get it or what it looks like. But sketch out the different tones, so capture the darks and capture the lights, and essentially we're making like a map of the painting or of the picture, the image, and deciding, okay, so my darkest darks are here and my highlights are here, or my shadows and my highlights. And then once you've done that, even though it sounds really, really simple, you've created a map. You've created something where you now know what's going on. So when you go to work on your painting, it's easier to just instinctively say, oh, that's not dark enough, and oh, that's not light enough. The reason why having a large range of value in your work is so important is that is the technique that's going to help you develop depth in your images. It's going to make your images pop. If you're doing a flower or an orange, it's going to bring that image off the page and give you a shape around it and you know, make it pop right off the picture. In this case, it gives it depth and the feeling that things are going far away and shrinking in the distance. Now, it's important for me to mention here that not all images have to have a large range of tones. So we don't always have to have the dark, 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 darks and the light, 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 lights. It is obviously recommended, but it's not absolutely necessary. You can still do this in a smaller range. You can have your darks and your lights, but they're both pastel-y, or they're both light or brighter. Not all images need to have a black somewhere in them or a super dark somewhere in them. Understanding where your shadows are going to go, regardless of how dark you want your shadows to be, is a huge step when it comes to learning about the subject that you're painting and figuring out how to master those colors, how to figure out how to mix the colors, how to create an image that you're going to be happy with. So in this particular painting, I've kept it pretty simple. I'm just using one color. I started with a wet and wet wash, so I've started with water on the background and dropped it in to the sky to give me this interesting sky pattern. I then went across the entire painting and blocked in all the different bits that I knew. I mean, this is complicated because it's all one color, so it's actually simple, but it's complicated to explain. So I put the color everywhere where I knew it was going to be initially, and then I kept layering the colors on in order to make them darker and darker. So if you notice in the beginning, I didn't go edge to edge, but I painted it in the direction the direction of form. So the trees in the background are painted standing up, so they're little footprints of the brush. And then the road is long and directional, so those are long strokes coming out. On the sides, these are fields, farmers' fields, so they're full of like wheat and barley, and they and there's lots of snow mixed in. That's why there's all that broken white going on in there. Okay, so today in this itty bitty little painting, I'm just going to describe it to you a little bit in real time. I did a wash up here. I laid down some water, and then I dropped my paint into the water and allowed it to move. And when I did the wash and when I laid it down, I didn't do it even edge to edge. You might have noticed I just kind of dropped the water in a few spots and then dropped the paint in and allowed it to move. And so what we get is this really lovely magic in the water, this mix between the darker spots and the blended out spots. Then I came down here and did an overall wash. This is an even wash of the road. It's completely solid and even. Put down my undertones. Now, funny enough, it's all the same color, so the undertones are going to be the same color as the the top layers, but you can see them coming through. You can see that there's a lighter tone here, a middle tone, a darker tone, and the deepest, darkest shadows and dark tones. So there's definitely a range of color, and this makes it really interesting. It's a very, very interesting piece because there are so many layers, one on top of another, that builds it up and creates depth. And when you look into it, you've got texture. If you take a tiny little piece and look into it, there's something happening in each spot of this image, which is neat. This is also a wash when I laid down the telephone pole. And then, and of course I sketched everything out first. No, not necessarily of course, but I did sketch it all out first. When I did the lines, I went with a slightly smaller brush. I sketched it first, and I took my hand and went back and forth. You might have seen that a few times. I was kind of getting my hand into the idea of where we're going to go. So it's muscle memory and saying, okay, so I'm going to do a swoop like this, like this, like this. And then finally, once I've gotten that right, and I feel like that's the right swoop, then I'll bring my brush down to my paper and actually draw the line. So it's a tiny warm-up. I'm just doing it a few times, but there is that little bit. So you might notice also in here where I'm going back and forth, I'm not touching the page. I'm just kind of warming my hand, getting my my wrist to move, getting my fingers to be loose, and then bringing that line out. Or perhaps I go up and down once or twice and then I bring out that line. So that's just a tip if you guys find drawing lines to be difficult. Another thing I do, I didn't particularly do it in this piece, but sometimes I'll anchor my finger, my pinky finger, anchor that here against the page, put the second finger on top, third finger on top, and then, so now they're all kind of locked into place. And then I will lock my arm and using my elbow, pull my whole arm at once. So I'm not doing this, but instead that. And because the pinky is on the paper, I have a guide for distance from the page, so I'm not going up and down, and I'm not going side to side because my whole arm is doing one entire motion. So again, just something simple to think about. So what I want to do now, because this piece is not finished, it looks pretty good, but it's not finished, is wash my brush. I forgot to wash it yesterday. Get a point. It's always good. And I'm going to use, I think I'm going to use this one. This is a Da Vinci Series 1150, and it is a beautiful, beautiful brush. This is actually a rigger. It's a fat, slightly shorter rigger, and I think it's full of gum arabic at the moment, so this might take a second. So if you guys haven't seen my tutorial on brushes, When you want to take the gum arabic out of a brush, you don't crack it, you'll break the brush. You can definitely damage the bristles. Just put it in some water, shake it around. It's getting pretty gooey. That's because the gum arabic, which is a resin of a tree, is coming to life. It's activating, and the goo is becoming more visible. Now, gum arabic is something I really need to do a separate tutorial on gum arabic because it's a really neat little project or product. It will, if you're not sure, it will brighten your colors and give your paint a slight gloss, and it will also thicken your paint. So if you can buy gum arabic in little containers. Winsor, Newton, Schminke, they both sell it, probably other companies too. You can take that gum arabic, mix it in with your paint, just a tiny bit in with the paint on the palette, and then as you paint, that paint will have more oomph to it. When you first get a brush, you might find that one or two of the little hairs or bristles fall out. That is okay, that's normal. I'm just using my hand to make sure that it's nice and soft and everything's gone. You typically don't want to touch the end of your brush because there are oils on your hands that will interfere with the fibers on the brush. Okay, so what I want to do using this rigger, this is a flat tipped rigger, is I'm going to attempt to draw it across the page in a completely straight line, nice thick straight line, and put in my shadow. One of the things that you can do if you're going to draw a line, now I could just freehand it, that would be fine, but that wouldn't teach you guys anything. So one of the things you can do is turn your page, get a comfortable position, and then just using water. Now this water is pretty brown, or yellow or orangey. It's got the Quinacridone Gold in it as I've been working, and I'm going to use that so that you can see a little better what I'm doing. But you would typically use clear water, and I'm going to figure it out, line it up. You know what, my lines here are actually wrong because the shadow would be down here, not up there. So I want to bring the water where the shadow will go. And again, one smooth line would be good, but I'm running out of space. Also, if you hold the brush a little further back, okay, now I'm going to come back, do it again. So my objective here is to get that line perfect. I'm lifting a little bit of paint. It's already there. And once the water is right, so you can see where the water's gone. Once the water is right and I like the way it looks, then I would drop in or paint on my actual shadow. And in this case, I know that the paint is only going to go where the water is. So I could drop it in like that, and then I would end up with more like this texture in the sky. If I want it edge to edge, I'm going to have to move it either with a brush or by hand. You want to mix that, get a nice smooth soft consistency because the shadows don't have a lot of texture in them. Now I can come back, of course, and I see here this is a little wonky, which doesn't really matter. Shadows go in all directions, but I'm going to straighten that. And sometimes a shadow is darker on one side than the other. So I'm also going to tip it down so that the paint lines up on the bottom. Paint falls to the bottom and it gets a little thicker there. So that was one. Let's go on and do the rest. Lightly put that water in. I want to try not to disturb the layers underneath. Here I did. I'm going to have to go back later and fill that in once it's dried. This particular paint likes to lift. And also depending on the paper, if you're using high quality paper, there's a really good chance you're going to have lifting going on. And lifting is, I'd say 99% of the time, something you want, because it's lovely to be able to lift out your highlights and other such things. But maybe not always. When trying to paint on other paints, on other layers, you don't always want that undercolor to be able to come out. Oops. So in that case, lifting isn't so much fun. So let's move that around. Now there's a little well in the paper right there, so I need to keep this moving in order to not get a spot anywhere. And if I dry my brush just a little bit and come over here, it would be called a thirsty brush. I can just blend that up. And I'll use a small brush this time, or a round brush. I'm going to paint on the shadow. Here I've created a run back. So in order to fix that, I'm going to pull my brush through it, not adding water. Just pull the brush through. There we go. Ta-da! All done. Thanks for watching.